Welcome back to the program. James Morrow here, sitting in for Paul Murray on Paul Murray Live. And I'm really pleased to be joined now by Shadow Home Affairs Minister Senator James Patterson, who is, I think, frankly, one of the clearest thinkers we have on issues around China, defense, and cybersecurity. Now, Senator Patterson, thanks again for coming on. The big news today is that acquisition, or the deal to acquire $1.7 billion in Tomahawk cruise missiles. But a couple of things strike me about this. One, wasn't this deal basically announced back in March, so there's not a lot new there? And two, I read Defense Minister Richard Marles' announcement backwards and forwards, and I still can't see any indication of when we might actually get this hardware. Is it time to stop announcing and start actually acquiring and deploying, Senator?
James, it's a very fair question. It's certainly a welcome decision that the government has announced today, because the Tomahawk is perhaps the most fearsome precision-guided munition available on the market today. It's previously only been exported from the United States to the United Kingdom, and it now will be exported to Australia too. The ones we're buying have a range of about 1,500 kilometres. They are lethal, they are targeted, they can be deployed from a range of platforms, and there's no doubt that it will raise doubts in the minds of a potential adversary who's contemplating, for example, deploying a surface fleet in our region. But, as you point out, in fact, it was a decision of the former coalition government almost 2 years ago to acquire these missiles. It was approved by the US Congress 6 months ago, and this government has previously announced this. This seems just like an announcement for the sake of an announcement, and no progress on deadlines or timelines or delivery. And we're living in the most urgent strategic environment. And you don't have to take my word for it. The government's own Defence Strategic Review said that. But we just don't seem to have the sense of urgency and purpose from the government on those issues, let alone the money to back it up.
Yeah, and just around that sense of purpose and urgency, you know, I was watching some of the stuff that came out of the Labour conference over the weekend. I was heartened to see Labour's Pat Conroy say strength deters war, but at the same time, there's been an awful lot of people in Albo's, the Prime Minister's own faction, disagreeing with this. I just reckon that Xi Jinping and a lot of other leaders must be looking at the state of Labour on this and laughing. What do you make of it?
Well, it's probably not a coincidence that they waited until after their conference to make this announcement on the Tomahawk, because they didn't need any more grief from their left-wing branch members. Look, credit to Pat Conroy. He is one of the few ministers in the government who's willing to really plainly state the need for this kind of investment and this capability. A lot of the other ministers in the government walk away from stating quite plainly that this strategic environment is dire, it is existential, and what is at stake is whether or not our children and grandchildren inherit from us the sovereign liberal democracy that we inherited from our forebears. And I think we have a very solemn duty to make sure that they do inherit that from us. And if this government doesn't get its act together and match the rhetoric with dollars and action, then we are going to be put in a very dangerous position and a very weak position. And we know what weakness encourages.
And I think you're absolutely right to call out people on the Labour side who really do stand up for things like Pat Conroy, so good on him. But I did notice again that a lot of the unions were talking about this defence policy really from an industrial perspective. Do we make a mistake sometimes, Senator Patterson, in this country in confusing defence policy with industrial and jobs policy?
Absolutely we do, and I was frankly quite worried to hear the Prime Minister try and sell AUKUS to his left-wing branch members and unionists by saying that there'll be a whole lot of jobs in it and they'll be unionised jobs. Well, I'd be very interested to know how he plans to ensure that the workers who go and work on these projects are forced to join a union, and whether or not having these unions in these workplaces, frankly, is going to increase their productivity, particularly when some of these unions are themselves opposed to AUKUS and campaigning against them. But I mean, the most important thing, particularly in a strategic environment like the one we're in, is getting the capability and getting it as soon as possible. It's a nice bonus if you also get employment and jobs out of it. And yes, there is role for Australian defence industry right through the supply chain through AUKUS, and that'll be transformative for them. But the main purpose is to get the things we need to help defend our nation in a time of very grave danger.
Yeah, and, you know, we all talk about China being the largest sort of threat in the region, or rival, or whatever word you want to use. You recently returned, though, from New Zealand, and there's been an awful lot of concern among people I speak to that New Zealand maybe hasn't been pulling its weight when it comes to China, especially maybe when Jacinda Ardern was PM. But what have you seen, and have you seen any change in New Zealand's posture in all of this?
I have to say, James, I was very heartened by this Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security delegation to New Zealand. New Zealand's come a long way, even in the last few months. They put out a series of national security strategies and papers, which actually very quite plainly call out the risk and the danger posed by the People's Republic of China, which call out the foreign interference in New Zealand's democracy and in their diaspora communities from the PRC, and which really step up the rhetoric in a big way, which has closed the gap that might have been there between Australia and New Zealand in the past and brings them much more into line with the rest of the Five Eyes community and other liberal democracies. I think that gap is now the smallest it has ever been, and there seems to be real momentum in New Zealand to take this issue seriously. They're seeing what we're seeing, particularly in the South Pacific. They see the very attractive offers that China is making, sometimes under the table, to Pacific Island leaders and governments, and they know how detrimental that would be to their national interest and their national security, just as it is to ours. And we've got more to do together to step up to that challenge and make sure that no further inroads are made in the Pacific.
Well, Senator, that's a pretty heartening report there you've given us. Thank you for that. But before I let you go, just have to ask you about a report in the papers today that Senator Jane Hume is going to be challenging you for the top spot on the ticket for the Senate in Victoria come the next election. Now, I'm sure you don't want to talk too much about internal party matters here, but I just have to ask your reaction real quick on that.
Yes, I am limited in what I can say publicly about these matters. It is a matter for the members ultimately to decide. I was very honoured to lead the Senate ticket for the Liberal Party in Victoria in 2019. I was honoured to be first chosen to do so by party members in 2016. And I'm very happy to be judged by them on my performance in the role so far, on my policy impact in opposition and in government, and on my potential ability to contribute to a future coalition cabinet, particularly in a national security portfolio in this very dangerous strategic environment we live in.
Senator James Patterson, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Always an education and a pleasure. Really appreciate it. Now,